Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. I hope you're all doing well. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a high waist skirt. So I'm going to put the measurements you'd need on the screen. First thing you want to do is to mark out your waistline. So I'm going to label my waistline. And then I'm going to get the full length of the skirt. For this skirt, I want the length to be 26 inches, but because I'm going to be having a waistband of 1.5 inches, I'm marking 24.5 inch here because I removed 1.5 inches for the waistband. So I'm just going to connect the points I've made. So the next thing I want to do is to mark my hip line. From my waistline to the hip line is 9 inches. So I'm going to mark that. And then I'm also going to connect it to get a straight line. So after that, I'm going to label each line accordingly. So right here, I'm going to write hip line. And then here, I'm going to write full length. So after marking the waistline, the hip line, and the full length of the skirt, the next thing you want to do is to mark your waist circumference divided by 4 on the waistline. And then you are going to add 1 inch for that. And then on the hip line, I'm going to mark the hip measurement divided by 4. And then I'm going to connect the 2 points together. After that, on the full length of the skirt, I'm going to mark the exact hip measurement I have here on the full length. And I'm going to connect it right to the hip line. You can decide to use a pencil to mark this because we will not need it later. So right there on the full length, I'm going to go in by 1.5 inches. You can use 2 inches depending on how curvy you are, but I marked 1.5 inches. And then I'm going to connect it to the hip line. So that is how you get your pencil skirt. Alright, so this other line, we are not going to be needing it anymore. After that, you are going to try to curve out the hip area because you don't want any sharp edge around the hip. Now I'm going to mark the dart. To mark the dart, you are going to need your bust span. My bust span is 7 inches, divided by 2 is 3.5. So I mark 3.5 on the waist and also on the hip, just so I can get a straight line. So after that, I'm going to remove 1 inch. I'm going to remove 1 inch for that, which is I'll remove half an inch on each side of the dart. And for this dart is supposed to be 7 inches long, but because we are removing 1.5 inch for the waistband, so I'm going to mark 5.5 inches for the dart length. Okay, so that's what I'm going to mark now. And then I'm going to connect the points. So that is our dart done already. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is to add my seam allowances all around. On the side seam, I'm using 1 inch seam allowance. You can use half an inch, you can use 1.5 depending on what you want. And on the top part, I'm using half an inch. And then for the hem, I'm using 1.5 inches for the hem allowance. So this totally depends on you. You can use whichever seam allowance that you're very comfortable with. So after that, I'm just going to join the points together like this. after joining the points, you are going to take your hip curve and smoothen out the hip area because you don't want to have a sharp edge around that corner. So just like this. Now this is how it looks after everything has been done. The next thing I want to do is to just indicate that this is the front pattern, and then again, you know, this is going to be cut on fold, so I'm going to also write that on it just so I know and remember when I'm cutting it on the fabric. After that, I'm going to go ahead and cut it out. So this is what I have after cutting. I'm going to use this to cut out the back panel. So first, you're going to take a fresh pattern paper, and then I'm marking out the zipper allowance. So I'm using 2 inches zipper allowance. So after marking that, I'm going to place the front panel on the back panel. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that my center front aligns with the zipper line I just made, and everything, all the lines I made, I'm going to make sure they align, and I'm going to pin it together like this. So this is what I'm trying to explain to you, that this zipper line is going to align with the center line of the front pattern. So I'm going to pin it together and then trace off the front panel on the back. Okay, so I'm just going to trace it out. And then I'll cut it out. After cutting, this is what I have. Okay, so I'm just trying to show you that everything aligns. The hip line for the front panel aligns with the hip line for the back panel. The seam allowance also aligns. The only difference is the zipper allowance. All right, so like I said, I used 2 inches for my zipper allowance. I'm just trying to show you. This is 2 inches. You can decide to use 1.5 for your zipper allowance, but I just wanted to use 2 inches. Okay, so as you can see, the front and the back panels are almost the same thing. The only difference is the zipper allowance. So for the waistband, the length of the waistband I'm working with is 1.5 inches, like I explained earlier. So I've marked 1.5 inches. From the top to that red line you see is 1.5 inches. Okay, and I also mark the middle of my entire waist measurements, which is 27 inches. So the middle is 3.5 inches. So now that becomes the center line. The reason you have to mark this line is because when you are cutting on your fabric, you need to notch that point. So as you can see, my waist measurement is 27 inches, which are marked here. And when taking the center measurement, you are not going to put the extra seam allowance into consideration. You're just going to measure your exact waist measurement. So like I said, I measured 1.5 inches and then I added half an inch for the seam allowance. I added half an inch seam allowance on the both sides and then on the lower part, except for the upper part, which will be cut on fold. So we don't need to add any seam allowance on that part of the waistband. All right, so now what we have is 2 inches, but the half an inch is going to be folded in. So I'm just going to demonstrate it here to show you. So that is the seam allowance at the sides, half an inch seam allowance at the side and at the lower part. So I just folded it in. So now what I have here is 1.5 inches, which is what I need for my waistband measurement. So I'm just going to measure it to show you. So now you see that the exact waistband measurement we have is 1.5 after folding the 1/2 inch seam allowance in. Okay, so this is not double. That's why when we are cutting, we have to cut it on fold, and the waist measurement is exactly 27 after folding the seam allowances in. So that is basically it on how to make a pencil skirt with waistband. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.